I'm Jeremy Shinewald, founder of mbaMission.
And I'm Liza Weale, founder of Gatehouse Admissions.
And we're back with our series of HBS application essay reviews. We've already looked at Diego's business-minded and leadership-focused essays, so now let's turn to his growth-oriented essay. If you want to follow along, use the link below to download a free copy of our book of sample essays from successful HBS admits. Let's dive in. 4 years ago, during my pandemic year ATR internship in Chicago, I remembered my uncle Johnny lived across Lake Michigan in Milwaukee. I also knew he'd been jobless, homeless, and in jail, but I'd never met him. My father, wanting to protect us and himself, had kept him out of our lives. Still, I hoped for a chance to connect. On a whim, I called him. After awkwardly condensing 20 years of life updates, I learned he was on the brink of homelessness. I asked Johnny if he could sell anything valuable while I reviewed my savings. Days later, after selling his gun collection and receiving money I wired, he called to thank me. That marked the start of our relationship. I drove down to Milwaukee a few months after, meeting as adults for the first time. Eventually, he confided in me, breaking down with regret about how he treated my grandmother, who suffered a fatal heart attack during an argument with him. Listening to his fears of disappointing family for not making it onto the first rung, I recognized my own insecurities of not living up to my parents' sacrifices. Over 3 years, I helped Johnny with his resume and job interviews. He eventually graduated from Hope for Prisoners to expunge his criminal record. Johnny passed away last month, but our journey left me with greater empathy. From running with ex-inmates in San Francisco to communicating layoff news to affected Credi employees, I listen and support, knowing I will grow too if I do. Okay, Liza, take it away.
Well, I think this is pretty serious stuff that he's dealing with in this essay. We have an estranged family member, and Diego is reaching out to Johnny and to establish a relationship. And it's a lot to deal with and unpack in just 250 words. And I think, as we've seen throughout his essays, he does an effective job of weaving in these, small details that help us bring us along and understand the situation and understand and appreciate the empathy that he must have displayed in order to build that relationship with Johnny, who, for his own reasons, again, we can infer, has, both maybe been excommunicated and also chosen to be a little bit excommunicated from the family. So it's a nice story of hope and forgiveness that we see, but it's certainly dealing with some tough topics.
Yeah, and he does it in a way where it's not, he doesn't resort to cliche. It's not overly sentimental or mawkish or anything like that. He just kind of, again, tells it like it is and talks about the ups and downs of it. I guess, the curiosity got to him. He had to know more about this person, and then he just abides. He does what he can. He's not turning himself into a savior. Look, he has to represent the story as it happens. But I think that he's just explaining that he took a risk, went out of his comfort zone, and tried to do something for others, for himself, tried to understand better. Yeah. And I think he really very clearly establishes all that. And then I think the applicability to other places where he's just got a little bit more empathy clearly makes sense because of the credibility of the effort with his uncle. It's not just like it's clear from the inherent drama in the first part of the story that the second part of the story would make sense, that he would become a more empathetic and thoughtful person in other environments. And one thing I've said before, I said this in our review of essay too, you don't have to be a winner every day. And so, in the story, his uncle passes away. Yeah. Like he didn't have to withhold that, and I mean, it's a fact, but also his startup experiences layoffs. And he could have avoided that. He could have said, this gives me more empathy in my relationship with my own parents and in my volunteer experience, whatever. But no, he says, look, it's okay. We're trying our hardest at Credi, and we've had some tough times, and I've been able to make tough experiences a little bit better for others by being more empathetic, and I think that's important.
Yeah,
Again, it sort of establishes him as a credible person, in not just in this essay, but throughout his application. You believe more in this person in what they're saying more honestly. It establishes a very credible application in that way.
Right. You know, you're not only getting all the best things, and is this true? Where are the warts? Where are the upsets? And he's comfortable in sharing some of those, and not necessarily even intentionally. They're just part of the story. They're just part of what happened. I also think, you know, he must have had to make some tough decisions in crafting this essay. You know, we don't get the full story of what were the family dynamics that led to this, and you know, what happened to his uncle Johnny? Why was he in prison? All these things, you know, and those are hard decisions that applicants have to think through when they're crafting these essays. What's important? What does the school need to understand about me? And what details do I need to share? And what is just noise that is not relevant to understanding me? And I think that can be really hard for applicants. It's that balance, that Goldilocks balance of what is the right level of context. No doubt, I just suspect that there were probably versions of this that were much longer or focused too much on the backstory. And I think that's a hard skill. We both know this. This is why iteration and drafting again and again is so critical, because I think it could have been easy to go down a little bit more of, here's all, as you mentioned in another essay review we were doing of, when you were speaking to, I think it was D. Leopold, who said, I've admitted so many grandparents, same sort of thing, right? This essay could have been entirely on this family drama, but he elegantly gets it back to him and why this story is meaningful to him.
And you know, one thing I've also said over the years is that, like, I would have this was done by another member of your team. I would have liked to have been on a fly on the wall during the brainstorming session, because I wonder if Diego said to himself, like, I don't know, this feels a little risky to talk about, like, my personal life here. You know, maybe I'll talk about my love of you know, some other topic. And I always say, like, you know, your personal stories quite often are areas where you have a story that no one else can tell, right? Like there aren't a ton of people telling the story of rediscovering their uncle 2 hours away from where they're living and reestablishing a relationship. You know, maybe there's one or two people in the pool who can tell something that could be considered reasonably similar, and maybe none. You know, like this is a story that Diego can own in a way that no one else can, and so, you know, and it's not that they need to be, like, shocked by everyone's essays and be like, whoa, I've never read this before. But if you have a story that fits where you know, where you can provide them with something that they haven't read, it's like, they're human beings. They're going to read a stack of these every day. And it's, as a human being, going through it and being like, wow, this really captures my attention. Like, I'm listening. I understand, you know, I'm a little more engaged with Diego because I'm not hearing, you know, a similar story that I've heard before.
Right.
And one thing I always like to do is I also like to think back across all the essays and ask myself, like, what have I learned about Diego? And have I learned, you know, enough? Have I learned a lot about him? And, you know, you can help me with this, but we've learned about him as an empathetic person, as a risk taker in this essay. It is a big risk to re-engage with someone. He could have found a complete nightmare. He could have, his feelings could have been hurt. He could have in like a real way, not just like, I'm sad. Like, you know, it could have destroyed his sense of family. He could have discovered secrets that he didn't need to know.
Right.
He could have experienced anger. He could have, who knows?
Yeah.
You know, he developed himself, you know, empathetically in this way. He, you know, in his previous essays, you know, we learn about him as a volunteer. We learn about him as a professional. We learn about him as an operator. You know, there's more. We're learning these are painfully short essays. I would like them to be 100 words longer each.
Right.
You know, they didn't ask me, surprisingly. And it's very hard to maximize. As you noted, he told us 3 separate stories in essay 2.
Right.
He's giving us a lot of information, and as you'll hear in the series, you'll hear in me on YouTube often. Keep the reader learning.
Yeah.
You've just got to keep the reader engaged. I think he does that quite well.
I agree. I think the Brooke Whelan, one of the members at Gatehouse, she used to be a member of HBS admissions team, and she always says that the essays, you want to give them something you want to inspire them to interview you.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of this. Is like, okay, are we giving them enough? Not everything, enough to get them to want to interview you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Diego definitely did that with these essays. He deals with some really provocative, deeper subjects. And I love what you were saying, how when you really explore a personal story, it's probably one that only you can say. I think that's really great guidance. But he does some, deeply personal things, and then does some really kind of more, there's tremendous opportunity in fintech, but all of this really are the tip of the iceberg, and surely gave the interviewer a lot of meaty things to explore in that interview.
Well, thank you, Liza, and well done, Diego. Follow this series for more reviews of real essays from Real HBS Admits, and be sure to download our book, link below, for dozens more sample essays.